Hello, you awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me for Stay Free with Russell Brand. We've got a fantastic show for you today. We're going to be talking, sadly, about the COVID comeback, which neatly lines up with the emergence of new booster shots available now. Plus, our special guest will be Dr. John Campbell. We'll be talking about Moderna's $400 million NIH payout, and then we'll be transferring elegantly to that sweet home of free speech where we can discuss myocarditis controversies, where we can talk about whether or not the vaccine affects your DNA, where we'll take questions from our community. We're also going to talk about Dr. John's journey more broadly. Has the pandemic period represented for him a personal odyssey from trust in authority to mistrust? Joining me now is Dr. John. Dr. John, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be back, Russell. Thanks for having me.
Should we start off by talking about the $400 million payment from Moderna to the NIH and the concerns around conflicts of interest, which should be called convergence of interest, if you ask me, because there isn't any conflict. Well, what do you make of it, Doc?
Very interesting, isn't it? I just discovered this about a week or two back, and this was the interview between Senator Rand Paul and Stefan Bancel, who's the chief executive officer of Moderna. And it turned out that Rand Paul said Moderna recently gave $400 million to the National Institutes of Health in the United States. And I thought that the chief executive officer might question this, but he said, oh, yeah, that's right. We gave $400 million just before Christmas. So as far as we know, $400 million went from Moderna to the National Institutes of Health in around about December 2022, as far as we know. And of course, Rand Paul said, well, do you think this could create any conflicts of interest? After all, you're the guys making the decisions about how we use these products, how we use Moderna products. And yet you've just been given $400 million. Could this create a conflict of interest? Now, a cynic might think it would create conflicts of interest. It did cross my mind, may have crossed your mind that there could be a conflict of interest here. But the CEO of Pfizer did not admit to that. He basically remained silent and didn't say one way or the other. So we've got this situation where there's huge amounts of money going from Big Pharma into regulatory authorities. It's not just that direct payment. We already know that Big Pharma pays a lot of money into regulatory authorities around the world, and yet no one seems to really to be prepared to talk about conflicts of interest, which is unfortunate.
You said the payment was made in December. I just assume it's the season of goodwill to all people, and these probably should mind your own business, Dr. John. Yeah, like the more we look at Moderna's funding, like for those of us that are British, we know that the hedge fund that heavily funded them was founded by Rishi Sunak, who's the Prime Minister of our country now, who was able to take his experience running a hedge fund right into being Chancellor. And again, no conflicts of interest there. Extraordinary. I wonder what you feel, also a UK-centric story, but that surely interests anybody, because the Moderna phenomena and but by nature of pandemics is one that traverses the globe. Though the conversation between that Australian hearing and members of Moderna revealing that they had no money put aside for liability in the event of vaccine injury, that's sort of one aspect of this. I know that in Canada they're building a lot of Moderna facilities. They're building Moderna facilities here in the UK, and they have more than enough of them, one might suppose, in the United States. And now the UK former medical officer Jonathan Van Tam, with a name that's dangerously close to an action star and a mentality that's dangerously close to a charlatan, has taken a role at Moderna. What do you feel about that, particularly in relation to what we've just discussed with that $400 million payment, Dr. John?
Absolutely. So this trust group, Theleme, I believe it's called, 2013, they put, we believe, according to The Guardian, $500 million, that's $500 million, into Moderna, which at the time was a completely unknown company. But now, fortunately for them, Moderna's come good and is now turning a profit. So a pretty good $500 million investment there back in 2013, you might think. Now, you're quite right. The British government has basically got into bed with Moderna. They've got this joint agreement. The British government, as far as we know, have put £1 billion into this plant that's being developed near Oxford. And as we just talking about, it's probably being built at the moment. £1 billion have gone into that. This plant is scheduled to make 250 million doses of Moderna vaccines, mRNA-based technologies, every year. There's a very similar plant near Melbourne in Australia that's going to produce a mere 100 million doses per year. And there's a very similar plant in Canada that's going to produce another 100 million doses of Moderna products per year. Now, this is going to include mRNA vaccines, for example, for COVID, but they're also developing mRNA vaccines for influenza, mRNA vaccines for a respiratory infection called respiratory syncytial virus. So they're rolling this mRNA technology out, whereas basically we have very little information on it. And the information we do have on it, we're actually somewhat uncomfortable about. And yet we're going on and on developing these. And the British government have actually committed to buy these products for the next 10 years. Now, they're not tried, they're not tested. We don't know about the efficacy. We don't know about the adverse reactions. But hey, we're going to buy them anyway. You know, would you buy a car like that? You know, this car may exist, it may work, it may not work, it may have spikes instead of steering wheels, but you're going to buy it anyway. You know, we've just gone into this full steam ahead, really on quite a blind basis.
The only way
a lot of people find that surprising.
I suppose if I was buying that car with someone else's money, if I was buying it with taxpayer money, I'd say, what the hell? You know, when you have people in government that just had a hunch that Moderna were going to make a lot of money in the forthcoming years and set up a $500 million hedge fund, which, as you say, due to ingenuity and nous, moxie and insight did come good. You know, when you have those people involved, you've got to guess that ultimately this £1 billion investment in the Moderna facility in the UK I'm referring to now is going to pay off. But it does sound like a commitment that no matter what, the doses and the extraordinary number of doses that you described, both in Australia and the UK, one way or another are going to get used.
It's 450 million doses between the factories and, of course, the massive production capacity that's already in the United States. Now, the thing is, one thing that's concerning here is the traditional vaccines, where you give basically a mushed up dead virus. You give an antigen to produce an antibody response, an immune response. These have been tried and tested. We know how safe they are. We know how dangerous they are. And overall, they are pretty safe. Why on earth would you take an established safe product, chuck it out and replace it with a completely unknown product? It just doesn't seem to make any medical sense. You know, I like medical decisions to be conservative, to err on the safe side, only to go into the new areas where there's a significant risk of harm. And to be fair, these mRNA vaccines, some of them are going to be acting against particular cancers. But these are going to be given to people that have cancer already. And of course, people that have cancer already have got severe risk of getting a lot sicker. They've got severe risk of dying. In that situation, you'll be quite happy taking a risk. But when you're talking about a healthy person who hasn't got cancer and hasn't got a disease, and you're talking about intervening in their lives, then that actually takes quite a lot of audacity to intervene in a perfectly healthy person. And another thing you alluded to there, Russell, was the revolving door. So we had Sir Dr. Jonathan Van Tam. Quite a few of these people have done well for knighthoods, Russell. So we've got Chris Whitty with a knighthood, and we've got Patrick Vallance with a knighthood, and Jonathan Van Tam with a knighthood. So far, I've escaped without physical abuse. I don't think you've had a knighthood yet, have you?
Well, the phone call, to be fair, have you checked the mail yet? Is it come through yet? I'll tell you what, they better get this. I don't think the people are going to stand for this much longer. I think that if I don't get my gong, if I don't get my knighthood, I could see there being a pretty popular uprising. But you are right, as you often are, Doctor. My knighthood has not yet been forthcoming, but, you know, we await the day for the alighting of the sword and the bestowing of the honour.
As indeed do I. I'm at the palace's disposal. But Jonathan Van Tam has gone from being the Deputy Chief Medical Officer to a post in Moderna. So he's actually now working for Moderna. Now, he's going to keep his university job at Nottingham University, it is, I think, but also going to be working for Moderna. Now, of course, no one's saying there's conflict of interest there. But what would be interesting is how far ahead of this appointment did he think, oh, you know what, I quite fancy a job at Moderna. Now, if that was a week ago or a month ago, fine. If it was 2 years ago when he was Deputy Chief Medical Officer, would that be at the back of his mind? Could that have potentially influenced any of the decisions he took? We're not saying it did. But this revolving door thing, if you think that I might be working, if I think, I think I've got a good chance of a job with Stay Free Media here. I think I'll maybe work towards that. Well, I'm not going to start slacking off Russell Brand because, I don't want to upset him. I would rather ingratiate myself with him and kind of work towards a job with Stay Free Media. This has got to be in people's minds. People are in the public eye in these senior positions just for a year or two. What are they going to do next? They go round the revolving door and they get a job they go from being a regulator to getting a job in one of these companies. They go from gamekeeper to poacher. And this is not just a problem in the UK. Although it is a problem in the UK, Patrick Vallance, for example, who was the chief scientific advisor, had previously worked for GlaxoSmithKline and made quite a lot of money doing that. Good luck to him, but let's hope that didn't affect any decisions he made when he was actually in office. In the United States, it's a problem. British Medical Journal has done quite a lot of good articles on this, actually, Russell. You can actually learn about some of the really quite specific revolving door issues.
We would, may I say, Doctor, we would like to offer you a job at Stay Free Media as our in-house doctor. Now, I should warn you in advance, I do require what may seem like an unusually high number of rectal exams. I like to have one every afternoon after lunch, and then it's straight to the palace gates to wait for the knighthood. I think you're possibly overqualified for the role, but the offer's there.
Yeah, I'll bear it in mind. Thank you. I'm only a nurse. I'm only a nurse lecturer anyway, and an academic.
But
I can do some quite invasive clinical procedures if I need to.
I do. They're almost required on a daily basis. Did Jonathan Van Tam, if I may ask, while we're still on YouTube, of course, because we do our first 15 minutes on YouTube, then we ascend, one might argue, into the reified, free speech-strewn air of full of pathogens of freedom over there at the other place that I sometimes don't name in case the algorithm picks it up. But while we're still here on YouTube, before moving on to the other place and talking about myocarditis and talking about WHO's regulations, do you think, to assess whether or not Jonathan Van Tam, while Chief Medical Officer for the UK during the COVID period, could have made decisions that were beneficial to Moderna, what type of decisions was he involved in?
Well, from memory, I think we bought over 70 million doses of Moderna vaccine. And the Moderna vaccine was actually the most expensive. So the Moderna was the most expensive, then the Pfizer, and then the AstraZeneca was quite a lot cheaper. So he was involved really in a fairly direct way in the committee, member of the committee that supervised purchasing of tens of millions of very expensive vaccine doses. Now, obviously, he did that purely on clinical grounds because that was his medical professional opinion that was the right thing to do for the country. But cynics might think it was potentially a conflict of interest, given in the job he actually transpired to take last week. And he was actually appointed to this job, I think it was on the 2nd of May. But it was only announced, as far as I'm aware, last week, and it was announced rather strangely on LinkedIn. It was a bit of a funny way to do it, and certainly a big delay in the announcement, almost as if he was trying to put it off. But of course, we can't possibly know that.
I wonder what friends he's got over there at LinkedIn. Maybe Rishi Sunak. It'll be an interesting rogues gallery, I warrant you. But as for the pricing of Moderna, it was an expensive but fantastic product. And sometimes you pay a bit extra for quality. If you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. If you pay cheese, you get mice. 8 mice is how many some of the Moderna vaccines were tested on. So you are getting real quality over there at Moderna. Now, we've got to leave YouTube because, as you know, the YouTube used WHO guidelines to regulate conversations of this nature, which is one of the topics I'll be talking with Dr. John about, as well as the ongoing debate about the risk of myocarditis between young men compared to older folk, where traditionally old people normally die more quickly than young people. I mean, if the Lion King's to be believed, that's part of the circle of life. But we'll be talking about that over on Rumble freely. So there's a link in the description if you're watching us on YouTube. Join us over there.